Metronomes. We are just 2 doors down. A metronome maintains a steady tempo. A metronome can be adjusted from 35 beats per minute on up to 250. Modern metronomes can indicate tempo visually, audibly, or tangibly.
In prison, my metronome was barely moving at all. Today, I think it's going so fast it might just fly off its hinge. Maybe if I put a metronome at my desk, I could slow things down.
You can have one for $15.
I'm
think
getting
the funny
one.
thing about time, the funny thing about time is that speed tends to have an opposite effect. For instance, high-speed cameras produce slow motion video.
I never knew that. That just kind of blows my mind. High-speed cameras produce slow motion videos. I think I'm going to have to think about that for a while. And I wonder how that might apply to my life. I think there's a gem hidden in there somewhere. I think I'm going to buy a metronome.
I've been walking a lot, 21 miles just this week.
21.
I've come to appreciate the superpower we humans enjoy. We were made to walk. While I walk, I listen to the metronome of music. I find myself walking in time to the beat. Some songs match my normal stride and others challenge me to push the limits.
A metronome marks time with consistent ticks, but each tick represents a moment that passes and is gone. I think I talked about that last week. In prison, it felt like these moments were slipping away, but there's always the potential for breaking free when the rhythm shifts.
So in prison, did you want time to go by quickly so you could finish the obligation, or did you want it to slow down because it felt like life was just bleeding out?
Well, in prison, everybody watches the clock and everybody counts the days. For me, the slow rhythm behind bars actually healed me. Prison relieved me of the pressure to function in a high-speed world. At times, I miss it. The tick of time and the weight of waiting. The weight of waiting. I think that would make a great book title. There really was a heaviness to that waiting.
So I'm not sure that I heard an answer. Did you want prison to hurry up or slow down?
Well, I wanted it to hurry up and be over, and I think everybody in prison does too. I was anxious to get out there and live, but my soul craved the slowness. When the feds added 6 months to my time, I was crushed. But that extra 6 months prepared me to face the world. So I think the slowness was a blessing. Your walks remind me of a book in our library, Chris, and I don't know why I've never read it. I remember buying it, and I remember being so excited to read it, but I'm going to read you something from it now. This book is called 6 Walks in the Footsteps of Henry David Thoreau. This man who wrote it decided he was going to take off and try to follow Henry's walks. And here's an excerpt from the first chapter. In the late afternoon, I sat down at one pond's edge to watch alewives nibble at the surface of clear water. I was wondering how cold it would get that night, hoping I'd manage without a sleeping bag, when a couple appeared on a dirt road circling the pond. The man was walking with a bad knee, and the woman, his daughter maybe, walked patiently beside him. I took the cheddar block from my backpack, cut cubes, and ate them from the side of my knife. I flicked cheese shavings to the alewives, which darted to the surface. Listening to the wind rushing through the pines, watching the fish swim under a glaze of moving clouds, I imagined my experience wasn't far from Henry's. What a poetically cruel compound. Alewives. When the couple reached me, I wrapped up the cheese block, stood, smiled, and waved. "Are you local?" I asked. They said they were, and so I asked if they knew where Henry David Thoreau had stayed when he was here. "Back in 1849, I said. They didn't know. "Maybe you could point me to any old houses in the area," I asked. The woman pointed me down a road, said there was an older house down that way. I thanked them, then continued, quickly getting lost again, and found myself walking toward a grassy clearing in which stood a colonial era Cape Cod style home. A woman, knee deep in a flower garden, tulips, daffodils, watched me. Beside her were orange halves, stuck face up on a bird feeder to welcome Baltimore Orioles, something my mom also did in the spring. Hello, I called. She smiled, waved. I'm looking for the house where Thoreau stayed, I said. Oh, yes, she called. It's just right there. She pointed her trowel across the pond. I introduced myself. I'm Pat, she said. Just then, a man with a pair of oars balanced over his shoulder emerged from behind another shed. I'm going fishing, he said to Pat. He looked at me confused. This young man is looking for the Thoreau house, Pat said to him. That's my husband, Randy, she said to me. Right there, he said, nodding toward the pond. I can row if you want. I love this book. It's poetic, but walking is powerful.
Interesting. Henry David Thoreau, he was walking on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and you can't help but think that all those walks that he did there were inspirational for his work.
Yeah, I think I'm missing something, Chris. Maybe I should go search for Thoreau's house and see an alewife. Do you know what alewives are?
Oh, I definitely do.
I'm sure you would.
I grew up in Maine, and
I don't even know what they are.
Every year we would go and scoop alewives out of the river when the season came that they would come through, and we would bring a bunch of them home. And
what would you do with them?
Well, the alewives would go up the river, sort of like a salmon. And they go to the fish ladders and stuff.
I saw a fish ladder in Maine by your house.
Yeah, we could scoop out buckets of them.
But what did you do with them when you got them?
Well,
did you eat them?
No, we did not eat alewives, but we did. We sold them, I think, to lobster fishermen who used them as bait.
Oh, they used them as bait. Okay, interesting. I don't even know what the alewives are. And I spend my whole life in front of this computer. I'm thinking maybe I should start walking with you. Or we could just chuck it all and take a tent and get in our car and go. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I don't know that we could just chuck it all and go, but I do think that walking has been... Well, for me, it's been a matter of life and death. I have diabetes, I'm overweight, I'm older, my grandpa died, he had both his legs cut off below the knee, he had strokes and he was paralyzed on one side, so he was confined to a real wheelchair. And when I was David's age, when I was, 7, 8 years old, I was tasked with having to dump the old man's urinal in the toilet.
Yeah.
And it was horrible smell, and it was just a horrible experience. And he was a crotchety old sick old man that was just bitter about life, and I didn't care for any of that.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's rough. So walking for me is to fend off the demon.
Yeah. And I think you can do a lot while you're walking. You listen to podcasts. I mean, you listen to music in your headphones.
Yeah.
I think if I was walking, I'd probably listen to audiobooks or podcasts. But I think it's a great time to get away. When you're walking, you're in the middle of the world, but you're really all into yourself. You're really isolated when you're out there walking.
Yeah, that's
and I
true.
think it'd be a great thing. I think I might try it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't keep up with you. But I could just maybe walk slowly behind.
I do a lot of power walking.
Yeah.
I'm hustling right along.
Yeah.
I want to try and get the 5 miles done as quickly as I can. So, which is also the metronome of music that I listen to. When the music is going quickly, then I'm walking quickly. And sometimes I even have to shorten my steps because the beat of the music is so
Isn't
quick
that interesting?
that I have to shorten my steps in order for me to walk real rapidly and fit into the beats. And then, of course, the next song comes along and it's slower. And, it's amazing how many songs that just have just the right tempo where it feels really good to get into that music and have your feet hitting the pounding the ground and at the certain tempo that matches the beat.
I think our reflective question this week is, what's the beat of your metronome?
Yeah, my metronome is my feet.
Yeah, but what's the beat? Is it a fast metronome or a slow? I guess when you're walking, it's pretty fast.
Well, a metronome can be adjusted,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting that metronomes are for learning. It's to
Mm-hmm.
help train people that are trying
To
to
get the
get a
rhythm.
timing of the
Uh-huh.
rhythm.
Yeah.
If you can listen to it enough, you can get a sort of permanent adjustment in your brain
Yeah.
that helps you to know what
I
tempo
had
to.
some friends who were musicians, and they told me that in the back of their mind it's always going 1 2 1 2
Mm,
1 2. It's the rhythm of their life. I think my rhythm is like zippity doo dah, and I think I'm
what?
going to make it. It's fast, but I'm not talking about how fast I'm walking. I'm talking about how fast my brain's working and I'm doing stuff. And I think in this year I'm going to try to slow down just a little bit.
You're going to try and slow down your brain, or you're trying to slow
Yeah,
down in general?
all together.
Ah, interesting.
You think I
Well,
can do it?
I don't think you can slow down your brain. I
Hmm.
don't know if anybody can control their own brain. Can
Well,
you?
yeah, I think
I
so.
don't think I can control
Well,
mine.
maybe not. Maybe not.
Mine does what it wants to.
Yeah. So I have a really interesting, I'm going to use this for our headline case this week, but it's actually a felony murder case. So last week we talked about my being on Emily Campagno's true crime podcast with Fox News. And last Wednesday, I got a letter from this woman who was writing to me, and she said, I wanted to contact you immediately as my sister just told me of your story on Emily Campagno's true crime podcast. My son has a trial next week. Can you help me to put a spotlight on this injustice? Or is there any recommendations you can provide me and my family?
So February 18th is tomorrow.
Yes, and my heart just goes out to them, and what a tough time. And I wrote her back and I said, there's not much hope. Felony murder is this junk prosecution that doesn't require them to even prove anything. But I think that there's maybe a change in felony murder rules coming. And, should he be convicted, just put your hope on that at some point this law is going to change and perhaps that he'll have justice. But this, I went on to read, and I'm going to study more about this case. But hi, this is Toby with an update. I actually heard back from the woman who reached out to me, and her son's trial was delayed. So we redacted it from this podcast, the rest of the story I was going to share, until his trial's over. We don't want to, create any kind of trouble for him. So I just want the woman who wrote to me to know that she's in our thoughts and prayers, and we're keeping her son's case near and dear to our hearts. And we wish you the best. And as we can, we'll share more details about this case.
But for anybody that is doing time for felony murder or is associated by family members or whatever, when it comes to this felony murder thing, ultimately, there's really one thing that's really most important, and that is it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Joy is a background running program.
That's true. And you always own your perspective. Even if you end up sitting behind bars in a prison cell, you can make it be something that enhances your life instead of destroys it.
Now,
It's totally up to you.
having said that, that joy is a background running program, and the circumstances, even behind bars or whatever, you can be dying of cancer, you can anything at all. You could have diabetes and have the threat of doctors cutting off your legs, like I have concerns about. But whatever it is, whatever your circumstances are, joy is something you choose.
That's true.
You have to make a decision that that's where you are.
That's definitely true.
Now, having said that, I want to also mention that this podcast is not about an individual who is doing time for felony murder, or an individual whose son is going to court, or any of those sorts. It's not an individual's focus that we're considering. What I want to make sure that everybody understands is that our podcast is more about the idea of ending this loophole, this felony murder is a rule, a judicial tool that the United States uses to convict people that are otherwise innocent of murder. They didn't kill anyone.
Or don't have enough evidence to convict them on anything, and they can just throw felony murder at them.
Felony murder is a loophole for prosecutors to throw Americans in prison for the rest of their lives.
Right. That's
Doesn't necessarily mean that these Americans that we're referring to are totally innocent. They could be. It could be that they're guilty of something, maybe even a felony, but that doesn't mean that they're guilty of murder.
Anyway, we kind of got into felony murder in our headline case, and now it's actually time for our felony murder segment. So I hope we didn't over felony murder you, but that's really what we're all about.
Well, yeah, really. Well, yeah, I don't think there's any way to over felony murder anybody.
No,
I think,
not until it's gone.
Not until it's gone. And here's the hope that I have, is that somewhere along the way that the Supreme Court will have an opportunity to consider in somebody's case the legality of felony murder.
Yes.
And in so doing, will have an opportunity to change the policy of the United States.
However, it would be pretty tough for the Supreme Court to do it and have all the states comply, because it is a felony murder rule in each state law. So it really needs to take hold and be a federal and a state.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
The point is that if the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of the land, of the entire country, and if the Supreme Court, what they generally do is they review an individual's case of whatever sort it is, and they see it, they view it through the lens of the Constitution itself. And if something has been done to an individual that is unconstitutional, it doesn't matter what state it comes from. That's what the Supreme Court and the federal government is there to do, is to impose anything that is taking away people's freedoms. And it doesn't matter what state you're in. The same thing happened with Roe v. Wade, is back in the 70s, 60s, or whatever it was, when they deemed that Roe v. Wade, they deemed that whoever that was had the right to have an abortion.
Okay.
And they changed that recently in the last couple of years. But the point is that affected the entire country.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see, but we're going to do our best to raise our voices about the injustice of felony murder.
So, Casey White is back in the news.
Yes. You mean the Casey White from Vicky White?
Yes, and I'll be honest with you. I never really cared for Casey White.
Yeah,
he seems like a thug.
Yeah, you know what? John didn't like Casey White either. He just didn't like him.
There were a ton of similarities between Casey White and Vicky White, who were unrelated, by the way.
Right.
Their last name was coincidental.
Last name, right.
But they had a relationship, and she was a correctional officer of some sort and helped him escape. And they went on the run together, and the authorities chased him down, and every part of that case sounded very, very similar to your case with you and John Maynard. Yeah. There were some significant differences. At the end of the chase, Vicky White apparently sort of committed suicide, which, by the way, I looked up the definition of suicide, and suicide by definition requires an intention. And none of us are convinced that Vicky White intended to commit suicide. It's possible that while the police were chasing her, she was holding a loaded weapon, and that when the car rolled over during the chase, that the weapon happened to be pointed at her head during the chaos of rolling over.
And the car rolled over, she pulled the trigger, and who knows?
So it's possible that it was just an accident rather than being intentional. But either way, the point is that Casey White and his attorneys are taking this to the top.
Yes, because they've actually charged him with felony murder. And I did some research on this today after you told me about this case. And I found this great paper. It's 45 pages long, and it's published by the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law. And it's actually in the Mitchell-Hamlin Law Review. This is volume 50, issue number 1. And the title of this article is When We Need Someone to Blame, Officer Suicide, Justice, and the Felony Murder Rule in the Casey White case. So I think, I printed this so we could really dig through it, Chris, and I think we should take this apart and present it over several different episodes. But really in this case, I think they're going a step too far, because generally felony murder does not apply to a suicide. And they're really pushing the boundary here. They're just desperate to.
Oh, wait a second. When you say they're going too far and they're pushing the boundary, when you say they're, what you're talking about are the prosecutors that are trying to hang Casey White
on felony murder.
And again, I don't like Casey White. I don't have any personal, I don't care for his, I didn't care for his appearance, his his demeanor. I don't think he was misdemeanors.
No, I don't
his
think so.
demeanor. I didn't care for his attitude. There were things about the Casey White that I just didn't care for. That's not the point. It doesn't matter whether I like the guy or dislike the guy. The point is that felony murder, no matter how guilty he is of other crimes that he's committed, no matter how long he should be in prison for the rest of his life or whatever, for whatever felonies that he's been involved in, including the escape, I just don't agree with felony murder.
Well, and the thing that really bothers me about this case is that they are pushing the boundary. Felony murder is already an outrageous injustice, and they're pushing the boundary to make it even broader.
Okay, wait. Now you're saying it again. You're using the word "there," like the
when I
pronoun
say there, I'm talking about the prosecutors always in this story.
Okay, but the prosecutors are taking this too far.
Yes.
And they're trying to use felony murder and make it even more of a loophole,
like this article says, when we need someone to blame, officer suicide, justice, and the felony murder rule in the Casey White case. And I think that title says it all. They're looking for somebody to blame because Vicky White's not here, and they don't want all the blame to fall onto themselves as the jail, as the people who allowed this to happen. And he's being the scapegoat for everything.
So the prosecutors are using felony murder, and in most cases, prosecutors use felony murder to go after people that actually have had some sort of a serious role in the death of somebody, even though they didn't actually pull the trigger. And this has gotten to be more liberally applied in more and more cases
than ever before. And this will set a precedent. If they get away with this, it'll set a precedent, and pretty soon there'll be prosecutors all over the nation trying to grab felony murder and make it apply to things that it never previously applied to. I mean, the statutes of most felony murder laws exclude suicide. This is crossing that boundary.
The prosecutors are crossing that boundary. This case that we're talking about that's being reviewed at Mitchell-Hamlin Law Review, that particular article is in opposition to using felony murder against Casey White.
That's correct.
And it's possible that this particular case with Casey White and his defense attorneys could take this to the local court, and it could be escalated to the next court, to the next court,
Mhm.
to the next court, until it gets all the way to the
And
Supreme
who
Court.
knows? This could be the case that does away with felony murder.
All
Who
right, now,
knows?
if it goes to the Supreme Court, that you know that Neil Gorsuch is one of the judges, one of the justices of the Supreme Court.
Oh, right now, today he is?
Right now.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I bought you that book because I knew you'd love it, but I didn't know I didn't know who he was.
And he's the author of this book called Overruled, titled Overruled, The Human Toll of Too Much Law.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I read a bunch of it today, and I'm just really impressed that this book sort of breaks down a lot of cases that Neil Gorsuch, as a justice of the Supreme Court, has experienced himself. He's learned about and been involved in these cases, and then wrote a book with a bunch of these in here, and he puts it into layman's terms so that the average person can understand what's going on. The first one that I dog-eared marked here was, this is John and Sandra Yates, and he is a commercial fisherman.
Ah, okay.
And he was out fishing one day when a bunch of agents from the federal government with riot gear and helmets and battering rams for doors and stuff came in and with a warrant for his arrest and surrounded their house and crashed in on them. And his wife was home and she was all shook up, and they came in and demanded to know where he was, and he was off fishing. So when they finally got him off the boat, they arrested him and took him to jail. And it wasn't until he got there that they had him in handcuffs and everything else, and he was already arrested when they charged him for the crime that he committed. And he was just stunned. As it turned out, the crime that he had committed, and this is not felony murder or any of that kind of stuff. This has to do with, this book has to do with the United States just going too far with too many laws.
Okay.
And they're just going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And this book indicates that back 60 years ago, there were 50 federal felony crimes on the books that you could choose from to charge somebody with in this country.
Okay.
And now there are over 5,000
Oh my gosh.
federal felony crimes that you can charge somebody with.
Overkill, literally and figuratively.
So this particular case, what he was charged with is, as it turns out, he had been fishing and caught a bunch of fish, and they were in the hold of his commercial boat when a game warden of some sort boarded his boat years and years before and came aboard and measured all the fish in his hold. And I mean, he had thousands of fish in there. We're talking about a commercial fishing boat. And they went through all the fish, and they found like 63 fish or something that were undersized by law.
Did all the fish die during this counting process?
Well, they'd be dead anyway because they're in the hold.
But can you still eat them? I mean, are they all ruined?
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Oh.
They're going to market. And
Well, but no, did they mess them up when they took them all out and counted them? Did they ruin his catch?
I don't know if they ruined his catch or not, and it's irrelevant to this case. So I'm sorry for
Well, it's not irrelevant to me, because then those fish would have died for nothing.
In vain, those poor
That's right.
those victims.
That's right.
So anyway,
all because somebody was trying to protect them.
all right, now you're getting us off path. So here's the point: is what they charged him with is, somewhere along the way, while they initially were measuring the fish and they took out these 63 fish, they told him to put those 63 fish into a separate tote and keep them separate, because now they're evidence.
Okay.
And later on, they went back to that same tote, and they felt that things had changed. When they went in and measured the fish, there weren't the same number of fish in there, and they were different sizes than they were before, and a bunch of other question marks that came up, and they accused him of altering the fish that were in there to different fish, that he had somehow gotten rid of the evidence and then filled the bucket with other fish that were also short, which is a ridiculous notion that if you're going to...
And how can they just... how can they prove that?
Ultimately, what they charged him with was a violation of the federal Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Oh, for God's sakes.
Which, as it turns out, was passed into law that anybody that alters any of your financial documents, which was intended to hang the big corporate guys, was Enron, and there were a couple of other big ones.
I have some direct experience with the whole Enron thing.
You can't destroy
oh my gosh,
your financial
and they caught
records
him with that?
to try, and then they decided that fish as evidence
is a record,
and if you get rid of them, if you get rid of the fish, then you can
how stupid, and how much money did they waste on that? And this poor man who's fishing with his wife probably makes no money hardly at all, and they saved us from him.
So let's go
this
to
whole country.
Let's go to a couple of the other ones in here.
But we need to speed them up.
This book is full of these, but here's another one. You know about this one. This was a guy named Marty, and he had a rabbit, and he, for many, many years, he was a magician and used rabbits in his magic show, and he was at a school showing his rabbits and doing a magic show when somebody that was there at the school by chance somehow understood that there was a law that had recently been passed where people that were giving rabbit magic shows had to have a special kind of license for the rabbit itself.
Oh my gosh.
And he was stunned by the whole thing, and they wound up charging him with this whole thing. After years of fighting this, eventually ran out of finances to pay for attorneys and everything else to try and get through this mess. Eventually, he wound up he wound up pleading to a guilty, pleading guilty.
Yeah.
And pleading guilty meant that he had a permanent record, a permanent federal felony record for the rest of his life. They charged him $75 for a fine, and they put him in jail for like 30 days or something like that. And when they were all done with the whole thing, they calculated, this Neil Gorsuch and the rest of the people that are involved in this case calculated that the federal government spent $1 million plus to bring him to justice so that they could charge him for a $75 fine and give him a lifetime felony record.
That is so ridiculous. I'm telling you, the federal government will spend $1 million to prosecute someone, and they just did.
When he finally pled guilty, they put him on a probation kind of a thing, and they told him that there were certain things that he had to do according to the law, and some of them were the cage that he kept the rabbit in had to be labeled so that it had live animals on the label, and then it also had to have an arrow pointing up so that it would indicate how to safely carry the rabbit so that the cage would be pointing up. And the guy laughed at the inspector when he told him this. This magician guy, he laughed at the inspector when the inspector told him this, and he said, there's a handle on top of that. That's what tells me what side is up. And it was a hoot. And then the inspector was not amused by any of this, and he told the magician, well, I'll send you some of these labels. And a few days later, he got in the mail 200 of these labels.
Oh my gosh!
For one rabbit cage.
Oh.
I mean, I read this story and I was just
that's hilarious. I want you to give us 2 stories from that book in every episode because I think they're just
great.
Hilarious.
There's tons of stories in here, so
I love it.
I'll go through and read some more of them, but here's something that is kind of important, and this was pretty deep, a lot deeper into the book. So this says 1 out of 47 is the title of this subsection. It's not even a chapter. Not only have we adopted more criminal laws at an astonishing clip in recent years, but the punishments our criminal laws carry have also grown markedly. Beginning in earnest in the second half of the 20th century, legislatures began to adopt laws that had, as Judge Jed Rakoff has noted, 2 common characteristics. They imposed higher penalties, and they removed much of judicial discretion in sentencing. Notable among these laws were statutes imposing mandatory minimum terms of imprisonment for certain crimes.
That's ridiculous. Mandatory minimums was on my list too.
It's a bad one. Yeah. Today, sentencing changes like these can propel some sentences into the stratosphere. A defense attorney in Florida told The Economist that looking at his client's prison terms, it appeared to him that the United States was conducting an experiment in imprisoning first-time nonviolent offenders for periods of time previously reserved for those who had killed someone.
Yes.
One of his clients who had been convicted of fraud was sentenced to 845 years.
Oh my gosh.
I got it reduced to 835, the lawyer said with a sigh. A group that looked across state prison systems found a consistent upward trend in the amount of time people spent in state prisons, and that the longest prison terms are getting longer. Another group found that one out of every 7 of those now incarcerated is serving a life sentence, more people in total than were serving any sentence in 1970.
It's
and
ridiculous.
While crimes tend to be a young man's game, 30% of those serving life sentences were found to be over the age of 55. Thanks to development like these, the United States is now a world leader when it comes to incarceration. Our incarceration rate is not only 8 times as high as the median rate in Western Europe democracies, it is higher than the rates found even in some of our closest competitors such as Turkmenistan and Rwanda. Like those of many states, federal prisons have been operating for years around or above 100% capacity. And those who emerge from our prisons often confront collateral consequences that haunt them for years, including the loss of voting rights, that's you,
Yeah.
licenses, public benefits, jobs, and access to housing.
It's ridiculous, Chris. This whole thing is ridiculous. I was in prison with a woman. She was like 78, and her husband was in prison too. And they were farmers, and they filed bankruptcy. And then the government found a cow that they forgot to list. And they threw this 80-year-old couple into prison for 5 years because they found a cow that they hadn't disclosed. What is up with that?
They found a cow. Yes, right. I remember that story. So
that's just ridiculous.
This says, this sort of sums it up, this sentence. When those on parole or probation are included, the Department of Justice estimates 1 out of every 47 adults is under some form of correctional supervision.
Wow.
1 out of 47.
Something. That's just ridiculous. This country's out of control.
So more than 1 out of 50 people is dealing with being incarcerated.
That's ridiculous. Oh my gosh, that book, I'm going to have to read it. So we are ready for our...
Oh, are we ready to draw already?
Yeah.
Wow, that was quick.
Well, not really.
I have so much more to talk about.
It's been one of our longer ones, I know. Hold on, I got to get our camera going here. What are we going to get this time? You know, I was regretting Metronome, but I've kind of had fun with this one. So let's get a good one this time. What have we got? Oh my gosh, I don't like this one for real. I don't think I'll learn to love it. Are we going for another one? Okay, good. Chrono was what that one was. This one is tense, past, present, and future. That's pretty cool. I like that. It'll be fun. Okay. So you know what? I have to have a confession here and see what you think of this. Our grandkids came down when we were putting this script together for the podcast and wanted us to come up and play a video game that we've been playing every night with them since Christmas. And
my mother would have a conniption if she ever even saw that there was any such a game like this that could even be played by anybody, much less her precious great-grandchildren.
We run around on these spaceships and find the imposters and we kill them. But anyway, the grandkids love it. We said, okay, good, we're done. We'll come down and record our podcast after we play. And so here we are at our outro, which we haven't written. Can we wing it?
Yeah, so we're going to wing it. So, So the thing is that if I'm going to point one more time that what I'm here to achieve is not to get Casey White off the hook. It's not to help any of the other felons that we've discussed in their cases on our podcast, but it's rather to change from a national standpoint the whole felony murder concept,
Well,
the ideology is unconstitutional.
It is
It needs to
unconstitutional.
be stricken from the record.
So we're going to
nationwide.
continue to fight against felony murder until we're no longer capable of fighting, Chris, you and I. We're getting older, but this is our mission, and it's near and dear to our heart, and it is so wrong. But once we get that one fixed, if it gets fixed in our lifetime, then there's mass incarceration and mandatory minimums and death penalty. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on and on. There'll be generations trying to fix this messed up incarceration system we have here in the United States. So, you know, a lot of prisons are being taken over by for-profit prison corporations. They built new prisons in Arizona, and into the law that they put together because the for-profit prison actually funds the building of the prisons, and they build them on state prison property. But there are rules, and they write into the rules when they build these prisons that the state will keep them filled to at least 90% capacity, or they must pay a monthly penalty to the for-profit prison. Well, that's just ludicrous that they're being incentivized to find reasons to put more people in prison. So
Core Civic Incorporated
yes,
and
that's
GEO
it. Core Civic is the one
are
that had me.
for-profit prisons which donated over $3 million to lobbies.
Yes, they do.
These
They're
lobbies,
powerful.
there's about 35 of them,
Mhm.
and they have 7 clients, and they are extremely powerful.
Yes.
And it's one of the many things that I think that is a huge hurdle to any of these cases going all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme
Yes.
Court being able to do something about
Yes,
this,
because
because
lobbyists have power.
they have real power.
We should get rid of lobbyists here in this country. Shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, so the point here, I just wanted to mention, is lobbies and the law, not necessarily felony murder, which is a rule, not a law, is something that has been applied here in this country since, well, it actually started in the
It started in England,
1640s
yeah.
or something like that is when it started. But it has grown here in this country, but in all other countries in the world, it has
Been outlawed as
Outlawed.
inhumane.
Yeah.
In 1957, which is the year I was born, England ruled it as inhumane.
Yeah.
And 67 years later, we're in love with it here in this country. It's
Yeah.
just ridiculous.
Yeah. And
We're supposed to be the icon of the world, and we
I am no bleeding heart. I expect judges and police officers and investigators and prosecutors to do their job and put people in jail for crimes that they commit. I am not about getting people off the hook for things that they didn't do. But felony murder it's obnoxious.
it is. It's ridiculous.
It is really, really off the Richter scale. It needs to be
Yeah.
eliminated.
And so once again, we didn't say it earlier, but this podcast is inspired by John Maynard, and we do it to try to make a difference to the felony murder rule, because it is felony murder that murdered John Maynard, and it's just so unfair.
Rest in peace, John Maynard.
Yes, we love you.
All right, so let's see. Share your story with us at hashtag 2Doors Metronome. That's for this week. We'd love to hear from you. 2Doors Down, reaching out to you.
At
to make
35 beats
At
and at 250 beats.
at 35 beats per minute and 250 beats per minute.
That's right.
Yeah, and all those in between.
And everything in between. And I'm going to get a metronome.
Yes,
I
you
think
are.
it'll help me pace my work. Subscribe on YouTube at 2Doors Down. For exclusive content, check out our Patreon channel. You know, one of the things we're putting on our Patreon channel, the cards that we draw out of our basket every week, Chris and I are signing them and putting the date on the back of the card for when that episode was aired, and we're going to be giving those cards away to our Patreon members. Our website is twoDoorsDown.com. Until next time.
Until next time.